Okay, so I'm writing this intro in post because I realize there's some invaluable context needed to understand my main point that got left out, which means now I'm going to try to explain the entire conceptual framework of economics to you in under 20 seconds. Right, let's go. If the ideal Platonic form of communism can be understood by the maxim from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, then the ideal form of capitalism can be understood by the equivalent saying from each according to his ability to each according to his contribution. In short, capitalism's supposed to work like the story of the little red hen. If you produce 50% of the value, you should get 50% of the reward in exchange. Now, there's several reasons why neither of these systems actually work as advertised in practice. First and foremost of which is that value is a function of utility. If I have no use for something, then it's worth nothing to me. Second, production isn't the source of economic value, demand is. If nobody's willing or able to buy what you're selling, then it's worth nothing. It doesn't matter how hard you worked or how objectively high its quality. And third, your time and energy is only valuable to you since you're the only one who can make any use of them. But you can apply them in calculated ways to do work, whose results you can then trade for the fruits of other people's efforts if they decide they have greater use for your products than they do their own. All of this is to say that all value is ultimately based on subjective utility or quality, not on objective criteria that can be detected or in some cases even quantified, which is what makes market analytics and predictions so notoriously unreliable. Now, obviously, there's still far more that I could delve into on these and related subjects, but that should be enough for me to get my main point across. And in the interests of at least staying nominally on course for once, with all that out on the table, I want you to do a quick thought experiment with me. Imagine I'm trying to pull my car out of a ditch. How would I do it? Let's say the car weighs circa a single long ton, or 2,000 pounds, just to make the math easy. Now let's say I can deadlift around twice my body weight, rounded up to 400 pounds. That's using my whole body to its fullest potential. I can just about lift 20% of my car's dry weight. But let's say I know a guy with a truck and a 3,500-pound winch, and I call him, and he comes to help me out. While I'm not wholly sure how the math and physics work out, having actually used a crank winch for a very similar purpose, I'm going to guesstimate that I'm applying a consistent 50 pounds of torque, again for the sake of simplicity, to the winch handle in order to pull my 2,000-pound car out of the ditch. Now the question I want you to ask and answer for yourself is this: which of us is really doing the majority of the work in this scenario, me or the winch? And while you're pondering that, let's try out another little hypothetical. If we assume the average man has a casual lifting strength of 50 pounds, then at a rate of one 50-pound load per minute, a manual laborer can shift about 48,000 pounds over the course of a standard 8-hour workday. Now, if his equally capable coworker only manages to move 24,000 pounds in that same time span, we would likely say that either the first man has the superior work ethic or that some extraneous factors like distractions or injury had held the other one back. However, if either man goes and gets a forklift, with most warehouse models being able to handle between 3,000 and 5,000 pounds per load, assuming he keeps up his regular pace of around a load per minute, he would have upped his productivity by between 300% and 500%. Now, do you think he should be paid 3 to 5 times his previous wage because of this? And more to the point, do you honestly think there's any version of reality where this would actually happen? If you've been around the block at all, you already know it doesn't work that way. Now ask yourself why that is. After all, without the driver, the forklift would be just a funny-shaped pile of metal, which is the same excuse I'm sure I'll hear from people trying to justify why their boss makes $1 when they make a dime. Even though without them doing the actual work keeping the lights on, he'd be out here selling stamps out of a baseball cap on the street corner, just like everyone else. And now you hopefully begin to understand the problem we have in the modern industrial era. Technology is, by definition, a force multiplier, enabling a single person to do the work of many with similar or ideally significantly less effort on their part. And even notwithstanding the mandatory obsolescence of 9 out of every 10 working-class people the process of automation always entails, we perpetually conflate the magnified effects of human efforts technology produces with a similar exponential increase in actual human ability. My working hypothesis for why this is the case is that the human brain doesn't have a natural mechanism for coping with emergent phenomena. That is, we have an innate tendency to assume intent behind complex action. And to be fair to ourselves, in nature the most complex things are either too big or too small for us to readily perceive with our senses. So the closest analog we have is our own minds and society. But here's the issue. Society needs a central nucleus of regulators and lawgivers to maintain even the most basic of functionality, and the human body does not, because each individual cell within the latter's organizational framework isn't locked in perpetual competition with every other one of its kind for access to a limited pool of resources and mates. Likewise, the individual cylinders and valves in an engine aren't going to sabotage each other in order to secure a greater allotment of fuel for themselves. But human beings stab each other in the backs over a salary bonus or a promotion every day. The problem as I see it is that we humans only really have the psychological equipment to deal with inanimate tools or animate spirits, i.e., things which have autonomous agency and ones which don't. The problem is that machinery such as an engine or industrial processes such as a factory or a supply chain operate somewhere in the gray zone. Yes, they have a centralized command structure, and neither the operator nor the engine can do what they do without the other one doing their part, but because both of these things are relatively new in the evolutionary scheme of things, our biology has yet to furnish us with sufficient tools to grapple with this novel anomaly. Now, with that in mind, let us return to my previous question. Do you think it's right that I should go around telling people that I lifted a car just because I was the guy working the winch? Or to use a more poignant example, if I tell an AI to write a book for me and it does, would anyone think it was okay if I went around promoting it as my own original work when all I did was type in a prompt? And herein lies the problem. It's all fine and good when we're talking about a literal machine that's physically incapable of making executive decisions of its own volition. But what about when we bring live human workers into the picture? Why do kings and generals get all the credit for winning wars when they were almost never the ones doing the actual fighting? Why do captains of industry get to say that they produce steel or cars or rockets when half of them likely don't even know the first thing about what actually happens under the hoods of the industries they preside over? Of course, all of this is a complete non-issue when we're talking about actual machines, since what is a machine if just a complex tool? And a tool, by my very own definition, has neither autonomy nor agency. It can't subvert the will of its operator since it lacks the physiological capacity to have its own thoughts. Moreover, it has no needs or desires of its own. It doesn't need to eat or sleep or breed. It doesn't ask, what is my purpose? What is my life coming to? Because it can't. But human beings are not tools. We are animals, and animals have to do two very important things that are beyond the ken of all but the most advanced AI models at the time of my writing this: survive and procreate. Obviously, a robot needs not concern itself with matters of its own survival, since most don't qualify as living in the first place. Again, by my own proprietary definition, which you can read on screen should you so please. However, the reason I use the word procreate instead of reproduce is because, contrary to popular belief, it is in fact possible for a sufficiently advanced human mind to find fulfillment and enjoyment in life without having to make tiny versions of themselves. I won't tell you it's easy, because it's not. And I won't sit here and tell you it'll work for everybody, because it won't. But I know for a fact that it is possible. Why? Because I've done it myself, and I know at least several others who've purported to me to have done so too. But I also know for sure that it's extremely hard to enjoy life when you've starved to death or died of exposure. And herein lies the fulcrum of the problem we've been having since this whole massive industry thing really got its legs back in the 19th century. No matter how strong or fast or smart you are, you'll never compete with a machine. If you could, there'd be no point in having them. Likewise, the small family-owned shop can never compete with a massive corporation with a globe-spanning industrial infrastructure and trade network behind it. This is why the end result of industrial capitalism is and will always be oligarchy. Now, I'm obviously not suggesting that we should actually go full 40K and outright ban any progress in technology, least of all reasons being this simply won't actually work. After all, even the actual Mechanicus has their creative little loopholes. And besides, the reason technology has the value it does is because it offers an insurmountable advantage to those who manage to harness its potential over those who don't. And so for evolutionary reasons alone, the simple life isn't viable. However, I do think we need to dramatically evolve our thinking around the mechanisms of societal value production and allocation, since clearly the ancient capitalistic premise of I make half the stuff, therefore I should get half the money, doesn't work when 90% of the actual mechanical work isn't even being done by a human hand anymore. And before we all go sally forth to seize the means of production, first off, remember what I said at the beginning about the true source of ecosystemic value. A far simpler and more naturalistic solution is simply to adjust the wealth allocation ratio. If a corporate executive can be paid the net worth of some countries simply for telling a bunch of other people to go make and sell products, then the regular warehouse or factory worker should also receive a 100-fold pay increase to compensate for their magnified operative influences. Or, if you say that'll bankrupt your company, then how about we start paying people in accordance with what value they as individuals actually produce, rather than letting them play make-believe that their influence counts the same as increased competence? Or we could all just sit back and watch as everything burns down because the overdressed monkeys in charge are too greedy to pull their grubby little mitts out of the trap they unwittingly wormed themselves into. But as usual, that's all just my semi-educated opinion. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share the video with anyone you know who has a sardonic sense of humor. And of course, if you'd like to help me give Big Brother YouTube the bird, come and join me over on Rumble and Odyssey. Links to both will be down below. Come and find me over on Discord or X too if you want to chat. And also don't forget to check out my books over on Amazon. I just released a new fantasy lexicon. If you need an ancient or alien language for your own setting or story or RPG campaign, be my guest. I promise I won't send Steve the Skull after you for copyright. But anyway, that's enough prattle out of me for one day. Until next time, friends, as always, stay safe, stay sane, and always remember, you can never think too much. You can only think badly. Peace be upon you.